Howdy folks, we've got our XDM10 stripped apart here. We're going to go through a couple of demonstrations. A lot of comments on my last video at the range were concerning the use of 40 Smith & Wesson instead of 10mm out of the XDM10 and how it could damage the extractor or something like that. So first, a comment on the ammunition. Arm score is not full power 10mm, as a lot of people want. It is closer to being a 40 Smith & Wesson plus pressure. Okay, so there's that. So it's cost effective, but it's cost efficient, but it's not full power 10mm. The 40 Smith & Wesson, this is 180 grain. It's moving about 100 feet per second less than this 10mm ammunition is, and at a slightly lighter pressure. At least that's how it feels out of this gun. It's very light recoiling. It's better than most 9mm that I've fired in a similar size. So I would use 40 in this sized pistol anyway, just for the recoil factor and the faster hits on target, for the same power efficiency as general 40, but in a better gun to use it in. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the use of 40 in the gun and why it won't hurt the extractor. We can see here that the extractor for the XDM is inside the slide. Okay, and now it is common knowledge, or at least it should be, that a new extractor or any extractor on an auto pistol in good condition should be able to hold your cartridge flush up against the bolt face, practically unsupported. It's correct tolerance. It makes sure that it stays flush against the bolt face, which is best, okay, to make sure that everything, the pressure curve and the brass obturates just right. Okay, so this is a good extractor for that. And because these cases between the 40 and the 10mm are all but identical, except for the 3mm here difference, the 40 Smith & Wesson is held by the extractor the exact same way as the 10mm cartridge is. Holds it right up against the bolt face. Okay. So, as far as fear of pressure or build up or case expanding the wrong way or headspace issues, etc., there's no issue for that. The case base is the same diameter. The case diameters are the same. They both fit inside of the chamber fine. The difference is based on how they sit on the rim. If we fit the 10mm in, you see the base of the case sits flush with these posts here, okay, which also sit flush with the bolt face. Now, I said flush. It's not quite flush. There's actually is close to not quite a thousandth difference there, that the 10mm case is actually sitting below this. So it's not actually resting on the inside chamber wall or the chamber mouth there, okay, which is where the case is supposed to headspace. It's not actually resting flush against that like it does in theory. It's actually being held slightly rearward of that by the extractor. Okay. Now people point out and worry that the 40 Smith, because of that chamber mouth, the rim in there, where the case is supposed to headspace on, the 40 goes all the way in till it reaches there, that 3mm difference. That's important if you just drop a case into the chamber and close the slide on it. If you don't do that, and the casings feed out of the magazine, which is a controlled feed, they feed out of the magazine directly into the hold of the extractor. Just like this, straight out of the magazine. It doesn't cause any strain on the extractor. Both cartridges are held by the extractor the entire time, from the point they leave the magazine until they're in the case, into the chamber, and then they're pulled out by the extractor, and then they're ejected. They're both held the exact same way by the extractor. There's no extra stress on it. So if the extractor from Springfield is rated for, say, 15,000 to 20,000 rounds of 10 millimeter. It'll handle 15,000 to 20,000 rounds of 40 Smith. If you had an extractor that was broken and you associated it with using 40, then it might have been a worn down extractor that would not have passed this test anyway, either with 40 or 10. That's the important thing to look for. If your extractor won't pass this test, then it needs to be replaced anyway, because that means your casing is, when it sits in the chamber, it's sitting too far forward, or it could be sitting too far forward of the bolt face itself, and that can cause separation, blown out primers, etc. So there you go. Perfectly safe to use 40 in your 10. Go ahead and give me a response if you have one, I guess. Thanks. Oh, and as a final note before I end the video, I commented in my first video on the range. Those were my very first shots with the XDM10. And I was complaining about how the slide wouldn't lock back, either using the 10 or the 40. And I tried a few different rounds out of the 40 Smith & Wesson that I had available, and they wouldn't lock the slide back on the last round, and neither would the 10. And I've shot XDs for a long time, and I understand there is a problem that you can hold this down. It falls in perfectly with your thumb. Your thumb rests right there. You want to hold that down. At least I do. A lot of other people do naturally hold this down. It keeps the slide from locking back. A lot of people complained about parasitic friction. Such a phrase. My thumbs weren't up high enough to be causing that issue, and they weren't up against the slide. And I left out, which is my fault for creating confusion. There were some segments where I was firing this pistol one-handed, two-handed, from different hands, etc., and it was still doing that for the first, I don't know, 40, 50 rounds or so that I tried. And I didn't post those, and that was my fault. And I didn't fire them all from full magazines. I loaded maybe 5 or 6 at a time for a lot of it, trying to get it to recreate the issue, and it did. After I started loading magazines full, and then went through about 2 magazines, then it stopped creating the issue. That's why I used the statement that I did as far as something needing to be broken in. It has not happened again in any way that I've tried at replicating my shooting stance or anything else. When I do hold down the slide release, of course it does happen. It happens when I know it's going to happen. But it was a genuine issue, not just a shooting stance of mine. Thanks. And not that I'm really worried about it, because it's rectified itself within a couple of magazines of first use. But anyway, there you go.